Longtime friends.
Okay.
All right, maybe not.
Oh, for this?
Yeah.
So do I hold this until the end of the meeting or just?
You can sign.
Okay.
I'll just.
Oh, yeah, we've already voted.
It's all good.
You already really voted. You
Yeah.
got a copy, so. Not really. That way Mark can take it with him.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I'd get set back if I didn't bring,
I'll
Okay,
go
talk
run.
Well, we are at time, so we will go ahead and start the meeting and start with the flag salute, and then we'll get going.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if everyone can turn on their little orange button on the mics. So today is a work session, so no decisions will be made today. We are just meeting with the Special Districts Association of Oregon. Mark Knudson's representative, and he will be going over the proposed superintendent recruitment process. So I'll just throw it over to you. You can give an introduction and then get started. And we're a very lively group, so I'm sure we'll ask a lot of questions.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's expected. I'm ready. I have a lot of answers. Let's hope they line
Oh,
up.
good. As long as we like them, you know.
Yeah,
Mark, can you get closer to your mic, please?
can do. Kind of an ethereal voice. How's that?
That's better, thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm Mark Knudson. I'm a senior consultant with the Special Districts Association. I've been with SDAO in this role for about 5 years. Before that, I was the CEO of Tualatin Valley Water District, second largest water provider in the state. And before that, I was CEO, or TVWD's chief engineer for several years. And before that, I was the COO for the Portland Water Bureau. So my background is water utility management. And so why am I here this evening? Well, a big part of what I do these days is working with special districts on recruitment processes. I also do troubleshooting and so on, but the fact of the matter is I'm a part of our team that does recruitments. This evening, what I'll be doing is providing an overview and some examples of how we would typically approach a recruitment. I want to be clear on a couple of things. First of all, this isn't a formal proposal in terms of this is exactly what we're going to do, because the first step in the process is to work with you and get a better understanding of exactly what you need so that we can shape it and be responsive to exactly how we target this particular position. So the examples that I'm providing are not sort of prescriptive in terms of what we're going to do. The second very important disclaimer is I will likely not be the recruiter assigned to your particular position. The good news is Bob Kiefer, and I suspect some of you know Bob, is going to be your guy. Bob has he's been with SDAO for I think 8 years now. Before that, it was like 15 years as the superintendent at Willamette Lane. And so he is SDAO's go-to guy when it comes to park and recreation issues, including park and recreation recruitments. He's done probably a dozen park and recreation recruitments. Don can speak to what an awesome guy Bob Kiefer is. He's also got a very stunning hairline, sort of goes with the position. So the fact of the matter is, as much as I'm happy to brief you on the process, Bob wasn't available to be here to meet with you tonight, and so you're really getting the second string. But the fact of the matter is, we'll give you the best examples in terms of how we would approach it. And again, I've done numerous recruitments. I've got 3 going on right now, one of which is a recreation district on the coast, and you'll see some of the examples. NCRD, North County Recreation District, much smaller than yours, but the fact of the matter is they have a lot of the same kind of issues, and so we'll reflect on that a little bit as well. So enough sort of yammering on and on. I want to give you some examples. everybody has it, but this, you know, we had to get these printed, so. And just want to make sure you've got the best quality. We're all working off the same order of pages, so.
That's funny. Or it on me later.
Well, you betcha. So the first thing I really want to start with is this summary of a typical recruitment process. It's just kind of a flow chart looking thing. And really, I'm not joking, the most important step is this first step. I call it the definition phase, but it's really to spend time meeting with you. And so Bob will sit down in this same setting in a work session and really pick your brains to figure out the who, what, when, where, how, why of this recruitment and really put some boundaries around it. One of the key questions that you'll need to consider, you don't need to answer it tonight, is the full board going to participate, or do you want a subcommittee of the board? And there are a couple of different ways to slice and dice that. Again, I'll reference NCRD. What we're doing right now with them, they have a subcommittee of 2 board members that are serving as the screening committee. And then they will ultimately narrow it down to a short list of candidates and then refer those short list of candidates back to the full board for the extensive interview process. It's one way to approach it. I've had situations where all 5 board members want to be involved in every step of the way. And that's awesome too. I mean, it's just, you got to think about how you want to structure that.
Is that really possible? With
Absolutely.
Being outside of public meetings laws and emails going back and forth and discussions, like.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't do, you know, we'll coach you on making sure you don't do serial emails or, you know, meetings outside of the formal meeting. But one of the other steps that's going to happen during this definition phase is establishing criteria. And once you establish the evaluation criteria and you declare the vacancy, then under state statute, you can have meetings in executive session to evaluate candidates, to consider your next steps, you know, identify preferred candidates, discuss the process. But you can only do that in executive session after you establish the criteria and declare the vacancy.
Okay.
So that's why the first step becomes so key in making sure that you've got a clear set of criteria to work from.
Is this a meeting that we're gonna be making any motions and voting on anything? or
No,
not?
no, this is all informational
Okay.
for you.
Got
So,
it, all right.
okay.
So with your experience, and I know Bob, that Bob hired me to work at Ben back in 1984. I turned it down and
Just
Don kept
yesterday.
me here, but anyway, how often would that committee meet? On average that you've seen?
In terms of the committee, assuming it's a committee of just 2 so that we don't have to have, you know, an open public meeting, to that extent, that committee might meet 3 or 4 times, 4 or 5 times leading up to, and part of it depends on how many applicants you ultimately have. An awful lot of that can be done. I've got a meeting on Monday. It's a Teams meeting, a virtual meeting to be able to meet with that committee down at the coast. So it depends, but, you know, yeah, it's probably less than half a dozen. Now, there's also then, you know, those finalists get referred to the full board, and there will be probably just one meeting that's focused on the evaluation of all of the finalist candidates. And again, we'll coach you on making sure that's done in an executive session, just so that, you know, there's some protection in terms of who all those candidates are. You will have to make the decision and provide some direction in that definition step. To what extent do you want the staff involved? To what extent do you want to have a public meeting for the candidates to meet the public and the public to meet the candidates? I mean, that's always, and again, there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's really what's the need of this community to be able to sort of make that connection with the candidates.
So prior to the board or committee, whichever the board decides to do you screen and delete applicants? Let's say that they came up and the only thing that person's ever done is
Yeah.
run a supermarket.
Yeah.
So you do that
Absolutely.
first.
So the screening process, and again, I'll get to it, but basically, once you agree to what the job description is, what the compensation is, we'll craft an announcement. That announcement will be publicized, we'll do the advertising. When we get all the applicants in response to that advertising, we do a first course screen to look for conformance with the minimum qualifications. That's what we look for. And that's why this step is so important. You gotta tell us what your minimum qualifications are gonna be. We can interpret those and do the course screen to make sure that the candidates that the screening committee looks at have met the minimum qualifications. The screening committee then maybe either on paper and or interviews will screen those candidates down to a manageable number that get referred to the presumably whole board or the finalist interviews. So there's a couple of steps along the way. We try to minimize it to get it down to just the candidates that are meeting minimum qualifications. We don't provide any kind of judgment beyond that.
Should we be deciding at the end of this meeting whether or not it's gonna be the full board or just a couple, or a committee?
No, I would encourage you to wait until Bob has a chance to meet with you so that he fully understands your thinking and rationale, and because again, it goes both ways all the time.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
One of the other things that we will set up is, I call it the schedule, but it's really a process and timeline. So we're going to flip to the next page, attachment 2. This is the NCRD timeline. And basically, it's just a schedule of activities all along the way. It includes our target date, what the activity is, who's responsible for making it happen. And then I always include a little status box. I don't think Bob does that, but that's extra value you'd get with me. But just in terms of keeping track of where we are and how we're doing in making progress down the work plan. And it goes from everything from drafting the position descriptions, having that initial meeting, all the way down through what the target hire date's gonna be, and everything in between. All that happens as a result of that definition phase and that first meeting that we have with you. Bob will spend some time asking some hard questions in terms of, how's it going? What are your expectations for this position? Are you looking for a change agent? Or are you looking for somebody that's really kind of status quo and gonna maintain an even keel?
Hey, Mark, I got a quick question. What's the cost with you guys doing this for us?
$6,000.
Okay.
Once you provide all that input, we'll put together essentially a board packet, an agenda item that will come back to the board. At that point, again, still in open session, we need you to approve everything. It will include the criteria, the job description, the announcement, the work plan, criteria, I mentioned that. I think that's it. Oh, and whether you're a committee or whether you're going to go full board. And if it's a committee, who are the committee members? You can do that all at the same time in one meeting. And it makes sense to do it that way, only from the standpoint of you've kind of done all of the brainstorming and thinking and collecting the ideas. We'll package it so that you can consider it as a single or one or two actions, basically. Once you've given us the approval for that material, then we're ready to move forward. We pull the trigger and go. And so we will post the recruitment notice. We will make the announcement available on SDAO's website, and we'll do a little advertising, and I'll get to that here in a minute in terms of how we do the advertising. At that point, it's it's pretty mechanical for at least whatever that advertising period is gonna be. And again, you probably want to do something more than a month, probably don't need to do more than 2 months, but whatever works with your overall schedule. And then, once the application period closes, that's when we'll do that initial course screen to get you the candidates that meet the minimum qualifications. Forward it, for the sake of argument, to the committee. They'll do their screening. At that point, then there may be a screening interview. I always think that's a pretty good idea because you want to make sure these people are credible before you refer them to the board. Once you've got the short list of finalists, schedule the interviews, arrange to bring them in. You'll need to think about whether you're going to pay travel expenses and how that's going to work, because I'd say, given the notoriety of your district, there's a high probability you'll get candidates from far outside the area. And so are you going to pay airfare and a night's lodging and rental car, whatever criteria you want to set up. And maybe it's nothing at all. If they really want it, they can pay it on their own. Again, it goes both ways. I've heard both sides of that coin. Then there will be, we will also work with you to help craft interview questions. I find this is a very critical step that people need to think about. Because the interviews have to be structured in such a way that everybody gets asked the exact same information, we want to work with you in advance to really think about what those questions are going to be. Everything from topics to the order of the question to who asks the question. If you're going to involve the staff, we like to get involved in at least suggesting some of the staff questions so that there's not a tremendous amount of overlap, and you can actually then get some value from the staff to get some feedback from them as part of the process as well. So it's a pretty thoughtful process at that point to make sure that you get the maximum value, particularly if you're going to pay to have candidates come in and show up for that board interview. Scheduling is kind of a nightmare sometimes, and we just work with you, and again, it's what's your priority going to be, and hopefully people will be willing to make themselves available to get it so that everything lines up on the schedule. At that point, and again, everything will be reduced down to scores. Everything has to be quantified because there are veterans get preference points for how it's scored. It's a statutory requirement. And so everything has to be on a scoring system numerically. We will compile all those scores, identify the ranking of the candidates. And again, in executive session, you will basically be in a position to, you know, is it number one or no? Number two is really a much better fit. You know, I mean, there's some back and forth and thinking about how you actually get alignment with the organization and the needs of the organization. At that point, when you have a finalist, frequently at that same board meeting, you will convene back in open session, because you know you can't make a decision in executive session. But in open session, you will then basically identify your preferred candidate. At that point, we will work with you to craft a conditional offer of employment. It's a letter that basically says it's subject to a background check, whatever additional checks you choose to pursue, and that individual accepts the offer, and that the final employment agreement, assuming that there's an employment agreement involved, that employment agreement is approved by the board. So there's several conditions that we attach to that offer, but we've gone from, I don't know how many candidates you're going to have, 15 to 20, down to 1 through this process. And we focused on that 1 to get that conditional offer, and then it's basically checking all the boxes to make sure this is really the right candidate and that you can reach terms on an employment agreement. At that point, comes back to the board again, might be the next regular board meeting, for approval of the employment agreement, at which point you're golden. Then you've got a new superintendent. But it really does take all those steps and a pretty thoughtful process over the course of 3 or 4 months minimum, sometimes longer. That's just the process.
I noticed that like on the example that you gave here, that looks like about 9 months
Yeah.
of a process.
Yeah,
Is that more typical than?
No, that's actually atypical.
Okay.
They chose to go with a really long process. They had 2 months of open recruiting. They have almost 3 months of sort of a lag period from when they make a decision to when they expect the existing executive director to retire.
Oh, I see, okay.
I was telling Don earlier, I'm not a big fan of really extended transition periods. I mean, you certainly want some transition period, but at some point, these two individuals are presumably leaders, doing a great job, and the new person needs to sort of take over and run with it. So that's part of the overall scheduling, and again, why that first step's so important, thinking about what that timing's gonna be.
Thank you.
I'm on to attachment 3, the executive director position announcement, again, NCRD, but it just gives you a sense of the content in terms of a little background about the position, about the district. You know, at NCRD, they've got a brand-new facility they're extremely proud of. We wanted to tout that. We touted the fact that they're on the Oregon coast. I think I used the term picturesque Oregon coast. That's pretty colorful for an engineer. But the fact of the matter is we want to make it inviting. And so you guys will be easy. You know, you got a golf course, a first-class aquatics facility. And so your facilities will sell themselves, make no mistake. And I think you'll attract a lot of interest with this position. The minimum qualifications, again, you really need to think about what you want for minimum qualifications. North County Recreation District was very open-ended. They were very flexible by design. They had this conversation, probably not the way I would do it, but they wanted to basically not require minimum requirements associated with park and recreation experience. They wanted to be open to somebody with a business background that has great management chops, but maybe doesn't know their way around a public agency. That's fine. That was their choice, and they made that an explicit decision.
Then again, that was in comparison to us, they're a pretty small agency.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But, the challenge, I do a fair amount of work on the coast, and it's tough to get high caliber people to live at the Oregon coast. Between the cost of living, the weather isn't a lot of fun except for about 6 or 7 days a year. It's very difficult. And so you got a small agency with limited budget trying to attract really leaders in the industry. And so they really wanted to be open to somebody that maybe doesn't have that same kind of background. Probably wouldn't apply here, but I just wanted to sort of point it out.
Can I ask, I mean, I realize we're not debating how much we're gonna pay somebody, but as I look at this thing, it says 90 to 120,000. Those are almost poverty wages if you're trying to buy a home.
Yeah, you could not buy a house at the Oregon coast with that kind of salary.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and and I had to work them over to get to that number.
Really?
Yeah, they were quite a bit lower than that to start with.
Yeah.
Now, we don't do the compensation review. I was just coaching them to acknowledge that they were going to have to pay more than they were planning on.
Yeah.
If you really want to do a compensation evaluation, then we would strongly encourage, as part of this process, that you hire HR answers to be able to come in, look at this, look at comparables. I don't know the status of, if you've done like pay equity reviews or comparable. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at NRPA.
Yeah, and I think you're probably solid, but But that will be one of those first defining questions that we need to pin down.
Yeah.
Because, again, you need to provide that disclosure in terms of what it's gonna be. Similarly, we'll want to make sure we understand your benefits package so that we can document that, put it in the announcement. So, again, issues related to relocation costs. Are you willing to pay relocation costs for somebody from Des Moines, Iowa to move out here to be able to be your superintendent? You have to think about that stuff. The application process is very standard. Again, unless you want to do something pretty creative, we just have all the applications go to our Tigard office. We've got a person in the staff that just keeps track of them, puts them in our, SharePoint system so that we can then compile them, and then we can have a group review in terms of making sure we met minimum qualifications. And then ultimately you get the candidates that meet the minimums. The next attachment is attachment 4. It's an employment application. We use it all the time. It's been through the fleet of attorneys and HR professionals to make sure that it's all appropriate, and we'd certainly encourage you to use that. The reason we insist on including an employment application is because it requires the candidate to sign it. And so they have to basically attest that the information they've provided is true and accurate. And that's really essential. In my former life, we wound up having a candidate who didn't provide true and accurate information. Ultimately rose to a very high level in not our organization, but another neighboring organization. It happens. And so you want to have them sign on the dotted line. The other reason for providing that is the inclusion of the veteran's preference statement. And so the very last page of that application is a veteran's preference form to satisfy ORS 408230. And veterans have, the state legislature has decided that veterans have a 5 to 10% advantage over any other candidate. That's just the way it is. That's why we quantify everything down to numbers, and this form is essential in terms of having them document what their military experience was, and if they are just regular discharge or they have some kind of other discharge, and if they have any kind of military disability. You get 10% if you have a military disability, 5% if you are just a veteran.
Just to clarify the scoring, as you score the applicants, we don't score the applicants, or do we score the applicants?
No, you score the applicants. We don't score the applicants. We just screen it for minimum qualifications, and then you will score them, and you might score them. You will very likely score them in the screening process to go from, let's say, 15 candidates down to 5 candidates. And then you will score those 5 finalists for the final evaluation for the board interview.
And then the highest score automatically wins?
No, I mean,
So it can be, it's a little bit subjective.
because, and it happens, you might have 2 number 1s and 2 number 2s, and the fact of the matter is, there can be ties, and that's where you have a conversation after you see the initial scores to decide, well, what do we really want to do? It's a board decision, and so you want the back and forth between the board members, and it's ultimately a consensus in terms of what we see as the number 1. Don't let the numbers just blindly dictate what the answer is going to be. That said, ultimately the numbers do have to support the decision that you make. That's why I do it all in a spreadsheet.
So if you have, so let's say, just for simple purposes, you have a 100-point scoring system. Does that mean that anybody that's not a veteran has a maximum of like 90 points, and
That's
then
correct.
the veteran gets the extra 10, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the next attachment, attachment 5, is an example application scoring sheet. And again, because presumably you will score the applications and then you will score the interviews with the board. 2 steps, 2 separate scoring worksheets, 2 separate evaluation criteria.
Are these, when we're doing all these scoring, when does this take place? Is this taking place during an open meeting like this?
No.
Okay.
So again, the only, the critical open meetings are the board approval of the criteria.
Got it.
Then we will, and again, whether, my preference is to email you directly, typically a link that you can then access the candidate application information. And you will just download the candidate application information, review it on your own individually, please, and score them individually, and then email back your scores or scan the evaluation sheet and send it to me, however you want to do it. But ultimately, those scores come back to Bob or me or however we staff it, comes back to SDAO. SDAO then compiles it in a score sheet like this. We'll crunch the numbers, and then when it's time to get together, we'll have a board meeting in executive session because we've approved criteria. In executive session, we will share with you the scores and basically start getting the input in terms of how to proceed.
Okay.
There are a couple of different kinds of evaluation sheets. Again, at NCRD, so I'm on attachment 6, they wanted to keep it really simple. And so it's basically education was 20 points, work experience was 40 points, interview was 30 points, board member preference was 10 points. And again, then the veterans preference would be on top of that. And so it was pretty subjective. We established what the criteria were, and it was up to each board member to figure out what that meant. If you look at attachment 7, this is one of Bob's favorite forms. He provides a lot more detail in terms of, looking at background, how they communicate verbally, their technical background, are they motivated, and overall impressions and recommendations. And I think it's great. I've used very similar forms in the past as well. It's really, what does this board want? How fine a detail do you want? Do you intuitively know that you can judge these candidates, or do you want to pick it apart in terms of very specific criteria? We'll do whatever you want to do. Again, the goal here is to just give you a couple of examples of how we approach it.
The one thing that the board might want to think about is, you make it way too cumbersome, you may turn off some quality applicants. If they go, man, if there's this minutia, this much of that, then, I don't want to go there. So we have to sell ourselves to a good applicant, as well as us looking for that good applicant. So,
That's true, because it
you know,
is.
so I just don't want to get in the weeds too much. So what you said was a good idea.
And again, I mean, it's just how complex do you want to make it? And again, I'm a big fan of attachment 6. Keep it simple, simple mind, simple form. Bob really likes attachment 7, and that's great too, because then it sort of allows you to sort of parse it and really think in those specific skills that are so important to the position. I think the last, attachment 8, typical advertising. I generally characterize this as a partnership between SDAO and the district. We will do things like putting it on our website. You'll get, I don't know if you get the member news or if you look at it, but you always see job listings. It'll show up in there, and that will attract attention, particularly from other special districts in Oregon, and folks see that, so that's a good thing. We will also place advertising in the National Recreation Park Association and Oregon Recreation and Park Association. And we will make sure there's a presence on LinkedIn as well.
What about WRPA or California Park and Recreation Association? They're right next to us.
Typically, we haven't because they seem to find it through the NRPA.
No,
Yeah,
yeah, NRPA, a lot of times, they print the NRPA and all those, as well as the Oregon Recreation and Park Association will print the NRPA.
Yeah, because I heard about
Yeah.
this job for me through California Park and Recreation Association advertising for this job. So I'm sure since 1980
Yeah,
they branched out. So,
Yeah.
And I find it pretty amazing how effective the member news is in terms of getting people within the industry in Oregon, and LinkedIn. Go figure. So it really just an evolution of where people are looking for work. I say it's a partnership between the district and SDAO because you're also going to want to make it available on your website. In that case, you might even make the announcement available, but we will insist that all the applications go to SDAO. That's how you apply. Nobody's going to give you an application. If they do, it's a mistake. It needs to come through SDAO so that they all ultimately get in the same pool and they're handled the same way. So that's really key. You might have some district social media that you use, a Facebook page or whatever, and that's great. Again, you can identify the announcement, just make sure that applications go to SDAO. And then the question is, what do you want to do about local media? And do you want to place a newspaper ad in the Newberg graphic? I knew that at one point. You know, but it's, you know, it's entirely up to you, and we would ask that you might be willing to pay the cost of that advertisement. It's a pretty short and sweet ad because all you have to do is identify the position, some of the sort of key factors, probably salary is one of them, and point them to the SDAO website. So
you see
don't.
that done very often anymore?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I 2 of the 3 recruitments that I'm currently working on wanted to do local advertising.
Did you get anybody from the local advertising?
Yes. NCRD got probably 3-4 people.
Wow.
Now, they weren't particularly well qualified.
Yeah.
They didn't meet, you know, my minimum quals,
Right.
but they're in the pool at this point. So again, it's a partnership, but that's one of the decisions you'll need to make along the way is what kind of outreach do you want to do at the district level to be able to support the recruiting effort. So that's really all I have for you this evening. I mean, it's kind of a whirlwind tour of how it all goes down. Hopefully, if you take anything away from it, you're going to have to make a lot of decisions as this goes forward. It's really up to you to tell us what you need, when you need it, what your criteria are, how you want to go through the process.
So, you know, in like not a public setting, a lot of times if you're interviewing for people and then you're gonna go ahead and offer them, do you do references, as reference checks on? And
Yeah.
and would you be doing the reference checks, or would we be doing the reference checks?
It can go either way. You know, typically, if you get the, you know, like the application form has identify 4 or 5 references. I think it's 4. Those are 4 hand-picked people by the candidate that knows that you're going to get, oh, this person's just awesome. They're so friendly and helpful and, right? Yeah. We can do that, or you can do that. It's basically a phone call to that individual. What we don't do is a kind of a rigorous background check in terms of calling all the former employers, trying to get the dirt on the person. We don't do that. If you want to do that, we have investigators that we know that we can basically refer to you, and you can have that done.
Okay.
The other question that comes up is, and again, we will do a criminal background check, just to make sure that they say who they are and that they have an appropriate criminal record, or, or don't have a criminal record, I guess is the best way to put it, right?
I was gonna say, what is an appropriate?
Criminal record, that's a pretty much clean sort of sheet,
Okay.
yeah. And that also typically identifies major driving issues. But what we don't do is a lot of, again, undercover work or anything that you might want, in which case you would have to hire that separately. The other thing that frequently comes up in this part of the conversation is, well, what about a drug check? We won't do that, and we will not encourage you, we will discourage you from including that as a criteria, largely because there is case law that says that unless it's a, quote, safety-sensitive position, for example, a lifeguard would be a safety-sensitive position. An administrator is not a safety-sensitive position. And as long as it is not a safety-sensitive position, you cannot include a drug check, because otherwise it's an infringement on constitutional liberties of the candidate. Been there, done that, so you can ask, but I'm pretty sure your attorney will tell you, no, you can't include it. And of course, then there's in Oregon, what happens if they test positive for marijuana? I mean, I don't mean to scare you.
Well, I'm hoping that SDAO can lead us through some of the legal hoops here, because so many laws have changed and there's so many expectations at the state level that I just want to make sure that we don't run into any issues with the public or whoever. I just want to make sure everything is above board 100%.
Yeah. The process that I outlined has withstood legal rigor. We've had multiple other district legal counsels review it. They seem to be fine with it. The real crux of it is make sure that the board in open session publicly approves the criteria, the job description, and basically the process that you're going to use. And at that point, you can do most of the work in executive session until you make the final decision in terms of who's going to get the offer letter. As long as you don't do serial communications and things like,
Yeah, we've learned about this. We'll
Okay.
try not to do that.
yeah. No emails to everybody. I like number 7. Yeah.
I can't speak out to Bob Kiefer because he was the assistant director, or maybe it was superintendent, I'm not sure of the title, for Bend Park and Recreation District. And then he was also the superintendent or director for Willamette Lane Park and Recreation
Right.
District, which are both pretty good sized districts.
Right.
Bob,
A lot of experience.
Bob is also currently a member of the board in Sisters, Oregon as
Of
well.
who?
Sisters.
Sisters, Oregon. He's a member of their board. He understands pretty much all aspects. So,
Right, he knows recreation.
yeah,
Absolutely.
he has a good connection and understands. We won't have any trouble with Mark or Bob, either one. We'll
Well,
be in
I
good-
appreciate that,
We're in good hands,
but
so.
Bob is clearly the first string, and I make no bones about that. The other thing that Bob does that is value added, and this is just Bob, he will get into the NRPA website. They have candidates that self-identify in terms of, hey, I'm looking for a job, here's my resume. Bob will take the time to go through those sort of people that have identified they're interested in looking for a position and jot down their name and their contact information, and then shoot them an email, say, hey, wanted to make sure you were aware of this position. So it's about as close to outreach and true recruiting as we get.
So he does some headhunting.
Yeah, I hesitate to call it that, but he does a little bit of a cursory screen to try and identify some prospective candidates.
That's great.
The other thing that, again, in value added, given all of his experience, he knows so many people in the industry in Oregon and nationally, and if there's a candidate from Oregon that comes forward, there's a good chance he either knows them or knows somebody that knows them, and we'll get some insight from that.
That's great.
So for our first step, the defining and the criteria setting, is that something we just set it for an agenda item at a normal meeting?
Yep.
We discuss it, and then we'd all just come to terms with the basic criteria, kind of within the realm of what you guys have presented here.
Yes.
And then would you guys give us a, maybe a packet of the different options and stuff when we go into that meeting, so we have guidance on how to discuss it and
You know,
decide on it?
it depends on how well prepared you are, and if you've kind of come away from this conversation with some ideas in terms of what you want and how you want to approach it. I don't know that I've ever sort of seen anything more than what it is that we've provided here this evening in terms of identification of options. But Bob will certainly talk you through that in a way that, and you'll get his view of what works best.
So should we wait until we meet with Bob before we move ahead on anything then? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's really what I'm saying.
Okay.
You know, you can kind of kick it around, but I
starting
would
to think about it,
discourage
but
you
let's wait for
from
Bob.
really making any decisions on this until you've had a chance to have a conversation with Bob about it.
Your criteria will be in your job description.
Pretty much, one of the questions that I would ask at this point is, how good is the job description? I mean, is it recent? Do you feel like it's pretty accurate? And again, has the board taken the time to review it? Is that what you want out of the superintendent for your district? And so, and with utmost respect, Don, you think it's great, that's awesome. These are the people that have to live
Yeah.
with the consequences of that, and so you need to take the time to review pretty much every word in that job description and make sure you're comfortable with it.
Another question, will Bob be giving us examples of other job descriptions that have been written for these type of positions? I mean, Don's written up some stuff, and that's good, but again, either adding or subtracting from that, I think is important, so I don't know if he'll be doing that or not.
I was gonna ask if we have access to these National Park Association, or do you have to be a member, so we could go and look at job descriptions ourselves?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. You'll also just get Bob's professional judgment in terms of input, you know. Gee, I've never seen that before. Oh, you missed this really important piece. And so he knows it. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know in terms of what a park and rec superintendent would look like.
Boy, he has a lot to live up to right now. Because
Yeah,
you guys are like
absolutely.
painting this.
This is the best part of this job. I'm just,
Bob and I have worked together for many years. As a matter of fact, our staff has come together over the years. We pretty much think alike. The staff, when he was at Willamette Lane, he brought them over here, and I took some staff members to Willamette Lane, so, over the years. So, we go back ways.
Yeah, and again, this really is his bread and butter. I mean, just given his experience, and as much as I would love to work with you, and again, I've got 40 years of senior management experience. To prove I don't have a life, I also served on the board of directors for my local water utility for many years. So I've seen both the management side as well as the board side, been there, done that. And I just have no qualms about it at all. Bob's your guy. I mean, you guys have an awesome organization. We want to make sure you get the best possible candidate, and Bob's the guy to make that happen.
And would it make sense to have him just come to a regular meeting?
Yeah. I mean, you just, and I can follow up and make sure that he's working with you, work with you, Matt, in terms of scheduling it, or what's the best way to make sure that we sort of coordinate schedules?
Yeah, I think Kat is sort of
Kat,
our
okay.
primary communication person, so she works with us and will send us the any kind of scheduling. What's that email thing she sends?
Yeah,
The where we vote for schedules. So
Yeah,
it'll definitely be through
Doodle poll
her.
or whatever it's
Yeah.
called.
yeah. And again, full disclosure, I've shared this packet with Bob, told him what I was gonna say. I didn't tell him I was gonna say all that good things about Bob, but he's reviewed and refined the flow chart. He knows exactly what you've been told and what you're now expecting in terms of his performance, so.
A couple of things that I'm gonna revert back to that you talked about was, one, you wanna do it, and this is for the board really, do you wanna do it as a whole board? Or do you wanna have a committee to do this? That's my question.
Since that's a decision-making thing, do we have to have that as an agenda item in a regular meeting?
Just don't make a decision.
Yeah,
I'm not, we can just talk about
we
it.
can just discuss that,
Yeah, we don't have
just
to
don't
make a
make a
motion.
decision.
Just don't make a decision.
right? Seems like the
it-
committee makes more sense.
Only because trying to coordinate 5 people's schedule is usually
Right.
like pulling your hair out.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can just say that I know that my time is incredibly limited. So I want to be on the final decision-making, but I would put it in the hands of whomever is on the committee to decide what the best way to go is.
And if you do a committee, like, you have to commit to all of it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, whoever's
that's-
gonna be on that committee has to commit to
Yeah,
it, right?
that's exactly right. That's a great point. It's kind of in for a penny, in for a pound, in terms of the participating in the screening process. We can't be changing that out partway through. But the goal is to get it to the full board process as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And you said it usually takes about half a dozen meetings to sort through it.
I'm
You
sorry.
said it usually takes about half a dozen meetings of the committee.
Well, yeah, I think that's the outside. I mean, you can probably do it in 4. And again, I think that's all pretty much done virtually now. I don't know that I've seen.
What kind of period do you usually, I mean, I guess we're gonna set the time period for how you're gonna collect applications, right?
Yeah,
And during the pandemic, I mean, it was hard to find people. Like, you'd have had to have a 3-month open process
Yeah.
just because it was really difficult. It doesn't seem to be as difficult right now. So
Correct.
would the recommendation to be like a 1 month or?
It's sort of, what is your schedule? What is Don's schedule? What do you want to do in terms of, I mean, you've got the benefit of, it sounds like kind of long lead time. There's nothing wrong with having a 6-week or even 2-month open period. I wouldn't go much longer than that, because the other thing that happens is people throw in, because it's like, oh yeah, that looks great, I think I'll go for it, and then they get another job.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do want to kind of move smartly
Yeah.
as you move forward.
Can you set a thing where you say, okay, well, we would open it up for 4 weeks, let's say.
Uh-huh.
But you have to have a minimum number of applicants, otherwise you extend it? Because I would hate to like cut it off and then you had, just somebody was on vacation and then didn't have an opportunity.
Yeah, my bias, and again, this is just my judgment, I think you have to have a deadline.
Yeah.
Just because what happens if somebody like comes in at the, not the 11th hour, but the 13th hour
Yeah.
and says, oh yeah, well, I want you to think about mine too. You've kind of put the other people at an
Well,
unfair
it all
disadvantage.
just depends on how many applicants you get.
Yeah.
Right,
Because if
that's-
you only
yeah.
get 2
Yeah.
or 3,
The other approach to that is you can leave it open until filled. That's sort of HR nomenclature. And you can continue to accept applications as the process is going on. But again, how do you do you just weave them in? You have another set of interviews? That's where the multiple meetings begins to show up.
Right.
And you lose objectivity too.
Yeah, exactly.
And Bob should have a pretty good feeling though for what we would anticipate for the number of applicants that we would have for the position.
Yes, and I really think, given what we've seen in the last couple of months at least, that you should have a reasonably good number of candidates if we do the advertising as we've identified it here, in which case, I'd think 4 weeks, 6 weeks would be just fine.
Perfect.
I think it's already out there. I think I saw it today on the SDAO website, not the application or anything, we're just saying that Don is retiring, so that people are knowing that that's happening locally
Yeah.
in the recreation circles.
I'm getting calls from Idaho and Montana and different places already. Matter of fact, you were out there with the guy from Idaho.
Yeah, at the golf
That-
tournament.
Yeah, that said that he was going to apply, and he contacted me after that,
Okay.
so we'll get that.
Yeah, and again, I mean, be thinking about this issue of, are you willing to pay travel costs? Again, I would strongly recommend the screening interview. That first interview can be done virtually. That's fine, just do all of those virtually. But then the board interview, I'd suggest you probably want to meet those people face to face, get a sense in terms of, just their rapport, which you're not able to get in a Zoom meeting. And again, you just have all those people show up over the course of a day or two, meet them all, ask your questions, and then be in a position to start making a decision. I don't want to scare you off with the, 4 to 6 meetings of the screening committee, because again, it really depends on how this plays out, how the process that you create for yourselves. There are ways to do it with a lot less meetings. I mean, it might be just 1 or 2 meetings, but then there are going to be a fair amount of emails back and forth to make sure that we're still getting the input and seeing all the information.
The other part is, I'd like to see the district staff, community partners, and stakeholders out there be a little involved also. The staff will be working with this new person, community will be working with this new person, and so somehow we could work that out.
When I was hired, I'll just share with the board. We had the meeting up at the community center. There was probably 50 to 100 people in the audience that was there for the 3 interviews.
And again, I mean, it's what you want. We have a hard time with a session like that only from the standpoint of how do you manage the questions? How do you assure consistency from interview candidate to candidate to candidate? And the piece that always makes me really nervous is how do you stop somebody from saying, well, how many kids do you have? Which church do you think you're going to go to?
Well, let me back up then. So if we, not as part of the interview process, but if we, let's say, have 3 candidates or 2, whatever it's gonna be, and you have a meet and greet with the staff and community, not asking, you know, specific interview questions.
Right.
I mean, is that another way to look at it?
Well, the other way to look at it is give the candidates an assigned topic to talk about. Give a little story about themselves, give their sort of, you know, values, what have they learned about the district in the past 2 months as they've been considered for this position? What are their impressions? Of course, they're gonna be very favorable, but you'll still get some information, and it will be short of the sort of bright light and, you know, interrogation kind of interview. So there are ways to structure it. We generally don't take a particularly strong role in that process just because it's your process at that point. We will facilitate the board interview and scheduling and coordination to get the person here, but we would want to work with you to set up, if you've got sort of this outside committee, outside panel, and again, how the staff has an opportunity to interface with the client, with the candidates as well.
Yeah, because I'm going back to the point of, we want this, whoever these people are that are applying, to know our community, to know that they want to be in this community and not just take a job.
Right.
You know, I think that that's important.
Yep.
That they know, you know, our staff, they know the community, they know us. And then they may say, you know, I really don't want to go there. Or they may say, this is amazing.
Mhm.
So,
You know, in the work that I do, like we were just interviewing for a director level position, and we always include staff in that process of making sure that, because they have a different perspective than we do in terms of what they want to see out of a candidate. How do we engage staff in this process in a way that really makes it feel that they have some kind of a voice in trying to figure out who is the best candidate?
If I was doing it, and I don't want to speak for Bob at this point because each of us operates a little differently, but I'm a fan of a meet and greet process where you basically have staff identify maybe 10, 12 at the outside representatives from different departments, different levels of the organization, come into this room and have an opportunity to meet each candidate. Maybe each candidate provides some prepared remarks in terms of topics that you want to ask them about, the staff want to ask them about. And then staff has basically some questions that we've at least looked at to make sure that they're not inappropriate.
Yeah.
And then they just have a conversation. And then the next part of that process for me is that the staff identifies one or at most two spokespersons that can then attend at least a portion of the executive session where you're making your deliberations and discussions, and they can provide the staff input to the board.
That's all.
That's how I've structured it in the past. It's kind of cumbersome, and, you know, some staff will say, oh, I didn't get to meet the person, you know, and it's like, we can't have you meet everybody. It's just,
Could you do, you know how you have in here where we're ranking or we're
Yeah.
just scoring people? Could you have a similar thing for those staff that are chosen to participate in a different set of questions, we're doing something different, and add that to your scoring matrix or no?
I wouldn't, but I do think it's really important to have some kind of feedback loop that allows that input to get to the board. You know, what I've described to you, I've seen work just fine, but it takes the right one or two people that are representing the staff's interest that can sort of provide that balance, that it's not just their opinion, but it's what everybody else had to say.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have one more question, well, maybe not, but I have one more
I
question.
was about to say I'm going to hold you to that.
I think it's another question.
Okay, you mentioned at the beginning of your discussion today about the transition and that you didn't, because we look at Don as being a person that's got tremendous amount of knowledge about this operation and, you know, where every sprinkler is buried in the ground.
Right.
And so we were discussing, you know, having him on for a certain amount of time, but you're saying a shorter time usually has worked out versus a longer time. I'm just asking the question.
Well, and again, it's what do you want? The new person is gonna want to sort of take the wheel and start steering the car. And so, at some point, you know, although Don is helpful in providing guidance, I mean, that person has to be trusted to begin to take over. How do you sort of orchestrate that process? When I left TVWD, a different model, I'd announced my retirement long in advance, and they ultimately provided a 6-week transition period. But after really 2 weeks, I was at a satellite office and was available via email and phone, and had probably 2 meetings with my successor, and I was just pretty much cleaning up and getting ready to sort of slide out the door. I was available to answer questions, help out, and provide coaching, but I wasn't even in the same building, because the new person needed to take over and start charting their course, building their relationship with the board, and moving the organization forward.
This is helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got a lot to work on.
Yeah.
So, but I think we know, we know what direction to go, what we need to account for, and what it looks like. So, I'm sure you'll get some more questions from us, and then we will be we'll work on getting Bob out here
Yeah, no,
to put it all together.
I'll get Bob and Kat together and get them
Yeah.
started to coordinate schedules, and we'll get Bob front and center and start having those conversations. And again, it really starts with that definition step to figure out exactly what you need and how we can make that happen.
Can we add an agenda item to next week's thing so where we can talk about a committee? Is that something we can do? Because we don't need to speak to
don't we
Bob
want it
before
to-
that.
Well, I
I
think we do
believe-
wanna have
I
Bob's.
believe under your bylaws.
Yeah.
That the president gets to appoint committees. Am I correct?
I'd have to look
Yeah.
at the board rules to
This is a little
confirm
different.
that.
Well, that might be correct. This is a little different. I'd
It
like
is
to
a
have
little different.
consensus.
Yeah, I would
I
too.
do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll focus on trying to get this on the agenda for the next month.
The following month.
Yeah, the following
Okay.
month.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
I think we already have this
Too
agenda
much.
done.
Well, we have to be really careful,
Yeah.
because in October, so you're saying in
It'd
the
be in
October one?
October.
November, you don't-
Regular, regular
Sounds
October.
perfect, okay,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
okay.
Okay, anything else before we wrap it up? Okay,
Well, thank you so much,
Awesome.
Mark.
that'll be
Thank
it.
you.
Thank
Really
you.
Hope that helped.
All right.